Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. Today, we're going to be talking about something that I think is very relevant to all of us, especially at this time of year.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
We're talking about habits. You know, we're all trying to better ourselves with New Year's resolutions and just always trying to optimize. And I think this deep dive is going to be really interesting. I think you're going to get a lot out of it.
Definitely.
We're going to be diving into a YouTube video from the channel Respire. And they have a really interesting system for building new habits and also breaking bad habits.
Yeah, and I think one of the more interesting things is kind of the unique way that they go about breaking bad habits.
Yeah.
Because, a lot of people think of it as like a willpower thing.
Right.
But they actually suggest kind of tacking on this positive action.
Oh, tacking on a positive action.
Yeah.
So does that kind of sound like you're rewarding bad behavior a little bit?
I could see how it would sound like that at first, but really it's not. It's not like, oh, I ate a whole bag of chips and now I'm going to go get a massage.
Right.
It's more like rewiring your brain
Yeah.
to kind of associate a positive action with, maybe catching yourself in an action that's unwanted.
So it's like a mental detour almost.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You're kind of creating a new pathway instead of going down that same old road.
And they talk about that in the video.
They do,
And
and they talk
yeah.
about how that actually affects the way that your neurons fire and stuff too.
Oh, wow.
So, when we talk about habits, we always talk about like, oh, it's ingrained.
Right.
And the reason why is because of the way that our brain is firing those neurons.
Huh.
But when you introduce this new action, it kind of creates this mismatch in that firing sequence, which over time weakens that habit's hold on you.
So it's not like you're erasing those neural pathways altogether.
Not
We're
necessarily.
just kind of weakening that connection.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, so let's back up for a second and talk about this 21-day plan they have, because a lot of people are familiar with the idea that it takes 21 days to build a habit. Is there any truth to that? Is that just kind of a random number? What do we think?
I think the research is kind of mixed on that one. Some people say 21 days. Some people say it takes longer.
Right.
I think the main takeaway is that you need to be consistent over a certain amount of time to really strengthen those neural pathways.
So whether it's 21 days or a little bit longer, it's more about that consistency and that time frame.
Right.
Okay. So tell me a little bit more about how this 21-day plan actually works. What do they have you do?
So basically, you choose 6 habits that you want to implement in your life.
Okay.
And these can be anything, from working out every day to practicing gratitude to, spending less time on social media, whatever it is that you want to build into your life.
Okay.
And then instead of trying to do all 6 every single day, which can be overwhelming,
Right.
you aim for 4 to 5 out of those 6 for 21 days.
Okay, so it's not like this all or nothing approach.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really great part of it because it allows you to have a little bit of flexibility.
It's like you're building that meta habit of just doing things consistently
Yeah, you got
rather than being so specific about it.
Yeah,
Okay, so that makes it seem a little less intimidating, right?
exactly.
Because you can kind of have those days where maybe you only hit 4 of your habits and you still feel successful.
And you're not beating yourself up if, you only got 4 out of 6 instead of all 6.
Yeah, I think that's so important because that's how a lot of us fall off the wagon with these things,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You set these unrealistic expectations, and then when you don't meet them, you feel like a failure.
Right. So this gives you a little bit more grace.
Exactly.
Okay, so you do this for 21 days. You aim to hit, most of your habits most of the time. What happens after that 21 days?
So after that 21 days, you enter what they call the autopilot phase.
Ooh, autopilot. Okay,
Yeah.
I like the sound of that.
Yeah, sounds nice.
It sounds easy.
So basically, you let go of that rigid structure, and you just see what's stuck. What have you been doing naturally without even thinking about it?
So it's not like you're continuing to force all 6 of those habits?
Not necessarily.
It's more about just seeing what's stuck.
Yeah, it's like a self-assessment.
Yeah.
What's your brain gravitating towards naturally?
And I imagine that can be really insightful.
It is. It really reveals what your capacity for change is at this point in your life.
Yeah, because some of those habits may have become effortless and some of them you may still be struggling with.
Exactly.
And that tells you a lot about, what's really resonating with you.
And about your priorities.
Right. It's not about judging yourself for the ones that didn't stick. It's about understanding your patterns.
Yeah.
Okay, I like that. So it's not just blindly following a plan, it's about becoming more self-aware.
It is. It's a process of self-discovery.
Okay, cool. So I'm really liking this idea of the 21-day plan, kind of easing into it, and then the autopilot phase, seeing what happens.
Yeah.
And that whole concept of capacity, I think, ties in really nicely with the idea of breaking bad habits, because
Yeah.
obviously you only have so much capacity for change at any given time.
Right.
So let's talk about those bad habits, because we all have them.
We all have them.
And that positive tack-on method you mentioned earlier, I'm really intrigued by that. So let's dive into that after a quick break.
That's good.
All right, so we talked about building some good habits with that 21-day plan. But let's be honest, we all have those bad habits that we're trying to break.
Oh, yeah.
And you were saying that willpower alone isn't really going to cut it.
Right. It's not usually enough.
And you mentioned this positive tack-on method. I'm really curious about that. Can you explain a little more about how that works?
Yeah, so basically, instead of trying to, like, suppress the urge, which a lot of times that's what we try to do with bad habits. We
Right.
try to just not do it.
Resist, resist, resist.
Yeah, but this method focuses more on, like, shifting your attention to something else.
Okay, so instead of like resisting the urge to check social media every 5 minutes,
Right.
you would immediately do something positive after you check social media.
Exactly.
Yeah, give me an example. How would
Yeah.
that work?
So let's say you're trying to break the habit of, like, mindlessly scrolling through social media when you should be working.
Mm-hmm.
Every time you catch yourself doing that, you could immediately get up and do, like, 5 stretches,
Okay.
or take 3 deep breaths,
Okay.
or even just jot down, like, one thing you're grateful for.
Okay. I see. So it's like these little mini actions that you're inserting
Exactly.
to kind of break that cycle.
To disrupt the pattern.
Yeah. Okay. That's pretty cool. And those are all things that are pretty easy to do.
Right. They're very manageable.
But wouldn't it have to be something that you actually enjoy doing? Because if it feels like a chore, you're probably not going to do it.
Right. You're definitely right. The key is to make sure that the action you're choosing is something that you like and that it's easy to implement.
Okay. So it shouldn't feel like another task on your to-do list.
Exactly. It should almost feel like a mini reward.
Okay. I like that. So for someone who's maybe struggling with that social media scrolling habit, what are some other tack-on actions they could try?
Well, it really depends on what they're into,
Yeah.
but they can maybe listen to, like, a snippet of their favorite song.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah, something upbeat that'll get them going.
And that only takes like 30 seconds.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, or they could just stand up and stretch their arms over their head.
Okay.
Just anything to kind of, like, get the blood flowing.
I like that you're emphasizing that it should be quick and easy.
Right. Because if it's too complicated or time-consuming, then it's just going to disrupt your workflow.
Right. And then you're not going to want to do it.
Exactly.
This is making me think about my own bad habits. I have this terrible habit of biting my nails when I get stressed.
Oh, yeah.
I've tried everything, willpower, bitter nail polish. Nothing seems to work.
So what about keeping a fidget toy at your desk?
Ooh.
So when you feel that urge to bite, you can just kind of fidget with the toy instead.
I love that idea. I actually really like those fidget toys.
Yeah.
It would be nice to have something to occupy my hands.
Or you could try keeping a little bottle of hand lotion nearby.
Okay.
So when you feel that urge, you can just kind of massage the lotion into your hands and cuticles.
That's a good one, too, because then you're actually caring for your hands instead of
Hitting
harming
them
Yeah,
instead of biting them.
I like that. Okay. So what's really cool to me about this method is the science behind it. You mentioned earlier that it has something to do with like temporal mismatch. Can you explain that a little more?
Yeah, so basically when you introduce this positive action right after the bad habit, you're basically creating a disruption in that normal firing sequence of the neurons
Ah,
that are responsible for that bad habit.
so it's not like you're getting rid of those neural pathways altogether.
Not necessarily.
You're just kind of like interrupting them.
Yeah, you're weakening the connection between that trigger and that behavior.
Okay, so it's like imagine those neural pathways are like a path in the woods.
Okay.
And every time you do the bad habit, you're walking down that path and it's becoming more and more ingrained.
Right, deeper and deeper.
But when you introduce this positive tack on, it's like you're creating a new path that branches off from the old one.
I like that analogy.
So over time, as you walk down that new path, more and more the old path starts to become overgrown
Exactly.
and less appealing.
less traveled.
Yeah, it's like you're retraining your brain to associate that trigger with something positive instead of the negative habit.
You got it.
This whole approach just feels so much more empowering than willpower.
I think so too.
Because willpower often leads to just feeling guilty and like a failure
Right, because you're constantly beating yourself up.
for not being strong enough.
Yeah,
But this is like working with your brain
exactly.
instead of against it.
You're using your brain's natural tendencies to your advantage.
And it takes away that feeling of having to be on guard all the time.
It does. It
Oh.
makes it feel a lot more manageable.
Right. Okay. So this is all super fascinating. But let's go back to the 21-day plan for a minute. We talked about the autopilot phase and how it reveals your capacity for change. What are some specific things that our listener might learn about themselves during that phase?
But okay,
Okay, so we've talked about the 21-day plan, the positive tack-on method, but what happens after that initial 21 days? What's next in this habit journey?
like we said, those 21 days are really just the beginning. It's like the foundation you're setting.
Mm-hmm.
And then you move into what they call the autopilot phase. And that's where you really start to see, okay, which of these habits are sticking? Which ones have I been doing without even thinking about it?
So you're not necessarily forcing yourself to keep doing all 6 of those habits, even if they're not really working for you.
Exactly. You're letting go of that rigid structure and you're just observing what's happening naturally.
So it's like your brain is giving you feedback. It's saying, hey, this one feels good. Keep doing this.
Yeah,
This one, not so much. Maybe we can let that one go.
exactly. And that feedback is so valuable because it tells you a lot about where you're at right now,
Yeah.
what your capacity is, your energy levels, what your priorities are.
So you're not judging yourself for the habits that didn't stick.
No, not at all.
It's more about just understanding, okay, this is what's working for me right now.
Exactly. It's all about self-awareness.
And recognizing that our capacity for change can fluctuate.
It absolutely can.
So maybe during that autopilot phase, you realize, hey, I'm really good at sticking to my morning routine,
Right.
but those evening routines, not so much.
Yeah, maybe you're a morning person.
Right.
And that's okay.
Mm.
You know, you learn about yourself through this process.
You're figuring out what works for you.
And maybe you realize that you do better when you're focusing on one new habit at a time instead of trying to change everything at once.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's all about finding that sweet spot for you.
I love how this whole approach really takes the pressure off. It's not about being perfect.
No.
It's about being curious about yourself
Yeah, it's about experimenting.
and figuring out what works best for you.
Exactly.
So thinking back to those New Year's resolutions we all make,
Yeah.
this is a much gentler approach.
It is. It's much more forgiving.
It's not about setting these huge goals and then feeling like a failure if you don't reach them.
Right. Instead, it's about setting yourself up for success by understanding your own patterns and your own capacity.
So what would you say is the biggest takeaway for our listeners today? What do we want them to remember from this deep dive?
I think the biggest takeaway is that change doesn't have to be this huge, overwhelming thing.
Yeah.
It can be a gradual process. It can be fun. It can be about self-discovery.
Mm-hmm.
And I think by understanding the science behind habits and by paying attention to what our own brains and bodies are telling us,
Right.
we can make real, lasting, positive changes in our lives.
Whether it's through that 21-day plan or the autopilot phase, it's all about figuring out what works for you.
Exact.
And I love that. It's about empowering ourselves
It is.
to make those small changes that can have a big impact on our overall well-being. So on that note, we encourage you to explore your own habit superpowers. What small change can you make today that will set you on a path to a happier, healthier you? Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.